So now let's transition from a European affair to a world conflict. First of all, there are the contributions of the colonies. Colonies are vital to the success of the home industry and to the national economy. Those same raw material imports, rubber, gases, tin, oil, food, now have to be imported into greater numbers to make sure you're filling this demand for rations and for wartime machinery. Warfare in the colonies is not uncommon because the idea is if the colonies are now supporting you or supporting the war effort, if you can sabotage what's going on in the colonies, you can hopefully distract your enemy. So warfare in the colonies to sabotage the war effort does happen, but it's relatively minor engagements compared to the European front. But what this really introduces is Japan in terms of the international scene with World War One. There are very large stakes for Japan in World War One. If they join the Allies, they can then wage war in the Pacific. The idea is not just that they are supporting Great Britain, France, and Russia, that they have some sort of particular alliance, particular feeling for them. It's just that this is going to actually suit Japan's designs at this particular time. If they are fighting this war in the Pacific, that means they might be able to gain hold of German colonial claims and Germany's claims to China in this region. There is going to be intervention by Great Britain to loosen Japanese control. But this really is an indication again of how the war doesn't just stay confined to Europe. And part of the reason why Japan is actually going to be joining the Axis powers for World War II is because of grievances by the upper echelons of government, the military wing. The fact that they didn't really get all of what they wanted in terms of territory after World War One. Colonials are also going to serve as laborers and soldiers in Europe, particularly coming from the English and French colonies, because this is going to help fill the need for manpower. Every able bodied man eventually is going to have to be drafted to go to the trenches. And so it's necessary to bring in more men from other areas of the world to try and help fill gaps. So not only are we looking at the colonies in Africa and India, but then we're also going to be looking at Canadian and Australian regiments. The inclusion of the home front is going to be absolutely necessary since these men are going to be aligned and necessary for the war effort. So women and children are going to be back in the workforce. Again, middle class women are probably going to be seeing the most distinction because they can continue to do what's termed respectable work. Nursing, assembling care packages, holding fundraisers, things like that. But working class and other women are just as vital to the war effort, if not more so, but at an enormous cost to themselves. TNT is going to have to be handled by hand because obviously you want to be very careful when doing it. And other weapons like mustard gas are obviously going to be very, very dangerous to work with. And it's quite often women who are going to fill these roles in trying to assemble bombs and assemble mustard gas, assemble everything that's going to be needed. And so they're also going to be suffering ill effects from working with these chemicals. Women, although they are going to be in the workforce and of course earning wages, these are definitely going to be much lower than would have been paid to men for the exact same work. Combination of low wages, lower than men, the wartime scarcity, lack of a stable home life, the fear of losing your male friends, boyfriends, husbands, fathers, children. The home front does have to make an enormous sacrifice. And so it's belated, but certainly a considerable acknowledgement of the right to vote that's granted to women from the 1920s and 30s, very much related to their accomplishments during the war. Now, there are a couple of key breaking points for the war, which is finally going to be how we break this stalemate. First major one, of course, is going to be the Russian Revolution. there is massive discontentment within Russia, which is linked to the stringent wartime economy and long term political oppression. Russia isn't the only country to experience riots and protest of the war or supply cuts. But these other nations, such as Britain, France, Germany, etc., tend to have a better political outlet and for individuals to express themselves. And economically, they do tend to become better off than the majority of Russians. So some of those characteristics, although the British government, the French government is definitely going to clamp down on individuals who dare to protest or labor strikes, um, their problems in terms of democracy, in terms of personal sovereignty and representation, most of those problems have been dealt with at least 50 years earlier. Russia has never really confronted those problems to a large degree. Now, revolts of the early 20th century were put down by force by the Russian army. Bloody Sunday in 1905, there was a peaceful protest of Russian workers who wanted to bring enlisted demands to the Tsar, saying we need to see massive reform in this area. And when these protesters began nearing the palace, the Russian palace, this particular Russian palace, the army, which was stationed around the palace in key areas, began opening fire. And this really helped destroy the image of Tsar Nicholas II as someone who really loved Russia, who was looking out for the best welfare of Russia. This isn't to necessarily say that Nicholas II was a bad man, but he was certainly a very bad Tsar. So there have been some minor political reforms in Russia, but really not enough to placate the nation. And the strain of World War I is going to exacerbate all those problems. Now, during the 1917 revolt, the army is actually much more sympathetic to society because of the war. And the Tsar is forced to accept a temporary government to step aside, abdicate, and provide safety for his family. Now, this government doesn't actually have the support of the people. And so a civil war is going to follow this abdication between rival political parties. The party that pretty much takes over the government after the abdication is what's known as the Whites. And these leaders of the provisional government pretty much lose support of the population when the party says that they are going to have Russia remain in the war. And one of the key demands of the Russian population was not just improvements in the economy, lowering of prices, more goods, stopping the food rationing, but also they just wanted out of the war. They were sick of it. They couldn't see what they were gaining, and they wanted to get out. So there's going to be a great deal of support for the Red Party, or the Bolsheviks. Their leader, Lenin, who has actually been banned, exiled from Russia for his communist ideas, he is very much a student of Marx and very much held on to this idea of a massive political revolution for the country. He's actually smuggled back into Russia by the Germans in October because they think, okay, if we can create a massive civil strife within Russia, hopefully Russia will be encouraged to leave the war, and Germany and Austria will no longer have to worry about the Eastern Front.